So there we are. Wonderful. Okay. After a couple of delays here, I just want to say welcome to everyone. So welcome everyone to this Saturday live Zoom. We are doing some Zooms every Saturday, and each time they are always exciting, but this one we're going to do just a little bit differently. Many people are looking into health and trying to find out what is the real truth about health. What can you do to live your best life? What can you do for your body to work optimally? Well, today we have a guest speaker on, and we're going to bring it down to everybody's level. Something that if you've heard about health, maybe this is some things that you've heard before. If you haven't, this might be very new to you. But for everybody, I think you're going to walk away with something today. Let me just tell you about our guest speaker. I'm going to read a few things and I'm going to let him tell you what mostly he's proud of. But our guest speaker is a clinical pharmacologist. He is a pharmaconutritionalist. He's been a former chair of the Forum on Food and Health in the UK. He's a senior scientific advisor to the UK Committee on the Safety of Medicines. And he was a fellow at the Institute of Food, Brain, and Behavior at Oxford. He has been doing numerous studies, clinical and pretrial studies, following up on those. Also, his whole life, he has been working on health and has a passion to making a difference in world health. And we're going to be talking to him today about the basics of health. What do we need to know that don't have that kind of a medical background, and what can we do to have optimal health? Now, I'm proud to have him on here is our guest speaker, Dr. Paul Clayton. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Carla, and hi to everybody else. I apologize
That's
for
okay.
being
We don't,
late.
it's okay. I know we're a little bit behind schedule, but that doesn't matter, Paul. We appreciate you. And I know I must have sent something with the link on it, but we got you here now. But Paul, even when I read all of this off on you, and I know there's a long list and there's a longer list of everything in your background. But you're doing more things even today that you have said you're probably even more proud of. If you were to introduce yourself, what would be the things that you would say that you would like to have said about you, Paul?
Um, well, I I used to be more of an academic than I am now. I lived in the academic world and rather enjoyed it. And then it became clear to me at a certain point that the types of discussions that we were having in the academic world had such strong implications for public health. And if you are um, very much embedded in the university system, it's actually rather difficult to become more practically and politically involved. And I'm not a Marxist. As Karl Marx said that the point is not simply to understand the system, but to try to change it, to move from theory to praxis. And it became a moral imperative. We There is such a wealth of information now that shows the links between how we live and what our health prospects are. That we are now, I think, finally arriving in a place where we can say, look, here are some simple things that you can do. Integrate into your eating habits, the rest of your behavior system, which are going to dramatically improve your chances of having a longer and healthier life and fulfilling more of your biological potential. Um,
But by just stopping here, so a lot of this, because science is science, you've said it more than once that when people are looking for the truth, you can't deny the science of health. So, uh, what you have been studying your whole life, and other people are doing the same thing, it's not something objective in a way. It's actually very scientific of everybody who's looking at health is going to find the same type of results. Am I correct in that?
Well, I wouldn't really want to create a dichotomy between objective and scientific. They should be close to the same thing.
Mhm.
The problem is that the science of this relationship, this very complicated relationship between how you live and how you're going to be healthy or not, it's so complicated. There are so many variables. And I think there's a lot of rather poor quality research with researchers asking questions which aren't the right questions. They're questions which might get them security of tenure, which will bring in more funding to do more research. They're
Mhm.
not necessarily the questions which we can then translate into improved public health practice. So unfortunately, science, like every other human activity, is culturally embedded. Scientists are not immune to the pressures that everybody else that everyone's exposed to. You have to put bread on the table. Um, you have to make a living. And there are certainly pressures that exist that make it difficult for people, for example, inside the American healthcare system, to step outside that and to make recommendations to people that will reduce the demand for healthcare. You see, that cuts down on the income flowing into the hospital system, the income flowing to the pharmaceutical industry, and we're not supposed to interfere with that. So
So we know, I mean, we've heard that there's a lot of things that people's thoughts go around the money. But if we put that to side, Dr. Paul, let's talk about the truth, the things that you have found in your many years of study about what real health is. Now, let's talk about where we are today. How did we get to where we are today? What is world health really looking like if we look at it from science, looking at it from the scientific point of view? How would you say world health in general is?
the truth, Carla, can you handle the truth? It's
I'm going to
it's
try to, Dr. Paul.
no, it's not good. It is a bleak situation from um, really from the 30,000 foot perspective.
Mhm.
Global health is in a very, very bad place, and it is in decline. I can give you a list of between 80 and maybe 90 different chronic degenerative diseases or conditions, all of which are becoming more common, and many of which are occurring in younger and younger age groups. And collectively, what this gives you a picture of is of a population that is being chronically poisoned. Now, the way that medicine is actually practiced, the way in which medical structures are organized, means that cardiologists will look at cardiological issues, oncologists will look at cancers, those people who concentrate on musculoskeletal disorders will look at those kinds of things. And all of them will tell you actually the same kind of story. Well, we're seeing more patients. We're seeing younger patients. We're seeing patients coming in with multiple conditions, which we did not used to see, requiring very complicated management. And because they're so compromised when they come to see us, we're not able to do as well for them as we used to. But here's the kicker. Because medicine is broken up into these silos, and because people in the silos don't tend to speak to people in other silos, there isn't yet, except amongst a relative few people, this understanding that collectively all of us are getting sicker, and we're all getting sicker in multiple ways. So the general picture is, as I said, it's dark, and it's getting darker. And the sad thing is that, or the paradoxical thing is that this is happening at a time when the pharmaceutical industry is growing and growing like a cancer to the point it is making so much money now that it has subverted a great deal of the medical educational process. And it has also corrupted and co-opted the regulatory agencies that were initially set up to protect us, the consumers, this, the lay people. And the institutions like the FDA, the CDC, the NIH, in Europe, EFSA, in Australia, the TGA, all of these regulatory agencies have become very distorted by this flood of funding from the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, you can describe this in terms of the deep state if you want. The pharmaceutical sector has clearly become a part of the deep state. And have this situation now where the agencies, as I said, that were initially set up to protect us, no longer do so. So it's difficult. It's difficult stepping outside that. One of the very few political figures, for example, who's even made any kind of reference to this, is Robert Kennedy Jr., who has been talking a little bit most recently about what the damaging effects of the so-called industrial or ultra-processed diet, the effects these are having, not only on adults today, but perhaps more seriously on young people and on infants and on the as yet unborn.
Oh,
The
wow.
damage that is being done to us as a species, and it's all across the globe now, is extensive, it's pervasive, it's incredibly dangerous.
So Dr. Paul, let's talk a little bit about how we got here. You mentioned something about being poisoned. You so at this grim state, and it sounds like a nightmare. And we hear people say we're just getting older, or it's like they're not really paying attention to it. I'm not sure if that's the word to use. It's like the frog in the water. It's just been getting hotter and hotter, and we're just taking it for normal. That people
Yes.
aren't feeling good, and that's getting younger. That it's like this is part of it. But how did we get here? So how did we get to this state? What is the poisons going on, or what are the
Mhm.
factors that have contributed to this?
Well, could I just say, it's not just that we're getting older faster. The aging process has been accelerated. And it's happened slowly. Although it's picked up speed since about 1950. The rot really sets in the early to mid 40s, 1940s, and then it accelerates after the 50s. And now we're almost in the final act of this terrible play. Um, until recently, I think that there has been this general awareness growing. Well, ultra-processed foods aren't too good for you, and of course, the food multinationals are fighting back, while saying, of course, they're not a problem. Um, and I would say that not all ultra-processed foods are bad. There are some that are absolutely terrible, some that are less terrible, and some that perhaps aren't too bad at all. So just because something is ultra-processed doesn't mean automatically bad, but the reality is that most of them are. So what is it in the ultra-processed food diet that is harming us? Well, the ultra-processed food diet, if you go to let's say, the British supermarkets, or the supermarkets in any other Western nation, you will find maybe 70 or 80,000 products. And if you really analyze what's in those types of foods, there's a couple of 100,000 different types of compounds, all of which have different nutritional values, metabolomic effects, calorific content, and everything. So it's a really noisy environment. There's so many variables. How can we work out what it is that's harming us? And this is what we call an equation with multiple variables. How do we would get to the solution of this out of all of this mess of data? And we are at a point now where we can actually begin to simplify this. And if we find ways of analyzing this curtain of potentially problematic factors behind that curtain, we can begin to see a much smaller number of pathological drivers. That is, drivers of our increasing ill health. Now, very quickly, let me just make the point. We didn't used to be subject to this. We didn't used to have so much chronic degenerative disease. 100 years ago, when people lived as long as we do today, and were healthier for longer than we are, the numbers of people who developed chronic degenerative disease were only about 10% of the numbers that we see now. So some chronic degenerative disease has always been present, probably in those people who had genetic risk factors. Because our environment is now so toxic, more and more people are becoming vulnerable to these conditions. And when doctors look at the situation today, most of them have no sense of history. They don't study it. They just see what the problems are in their waiting rooms, in their clinics, in their hospitals. They say, well, let's treat it. We'll treat it with drugs because that's all they are taught how to do. And so let's just take a question, any one condition. It could be asthma. Doctors today think that it's normal that in every classroom there'll be 3 or 4 children bringing inhalers to school. That's normal. Okay, these have a problem. These kids have a problem. Let's give them inhalers. What the doctors don't know is that 3 or 4 generations ago, no children had asthma. So, as I said, let's come back to the multiple variables, how it's damaging us, what we can do to solve it. So, behind all of this toxic environment, all the many things in this toxic environment, it turns out there's probably only between 4 and 6 major issues that are killing us. And I'll quickly run through them. Chronic inflammation, which I'm sure many of your audience have heard of. Dysbiosis, which means you have the wrong population of microbes in the large intestine and therefore in every other tissue. A pattern of malnutrition called type B malnutrition, where people are low in many vitamins and trace elements and phytonutrients and lots of other things. And finally, glycemic mismatch, which describes a situation where you're pouring too much glucose into the bloodstream, not taking enough away, which leads to hyperinsulinemia, and it leads to metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and then a lot of downstream long-term complications. Now, those are four drivers of disease. And if you look at all the chronic degenerative diseases that are important today, each one of those four drivers is involved. The purpose of moving towards this simplifying, if you like, grand unifying theory of chronic degenerative disease, the importance of this is it means we can develop antidotes. By identifying each one of the drivers, we can find a way to block it. And that's what the health protocol is all about. That is what 50 years of my work have been about. We now have these antidotes. And what we find is that when we give these to people who have what we call lifestyle conditions, very typically, over a period of months, those symptoms become less severe or less frequent. After about, let's say, 10 to 12 months, in many cases, they disappear altogether. And the majority of people who use this program, not everyone, but the majority, within about a year, will become pharmaceutically independent. That is, they no longer require symptomatic management by pharmaceuticals. So this is actually a complete transformation in our understanding of chronic degenerative disease, and it is potentially an absolute revolution in not only how we develop healthcare, but it leads to an improvement in public health that modern medical management has completely failed to create and cannot, in fact, create.
Mhm.
That's
So
the
let's just
future.
look at let's just look at these four
Mm,
things.
mm,
So chronic inflammation.
yeah.
You've written books about this. You have talked about how important doing something about it because it's really degrading your body. So most people have chronic inflammation. So tell us a little bit about what we can do about it. You're saying that is most of the diseases out there. I remember in your book, Out of the Fire, it was how chronic inflammation is the root of all disease and how to put out the fire. So we're burning up. We have this chronic inflammation in our bodies. And most people have heard about that. So what is it that we're doing to get rid of the chronic inflammation?
Well, it's not the root of all diseases. It's one of the roots. It's one of the four major roots.
Okay.
And could I
I'm
just
just reading the text of your book, Dr. Paul.
okay, okay.
Yes, I know.
Well, it's involved. It's involved in many, perhaps most, of the chronic degenerative conditions. And let me just hasten to say, I didn't discover the importance of chronic inflammation. Many other good scientists had done the work before me. And all I'm doing is I'm picking the crumbs off their table and taking that information and cross-fertilizing with the work of other experts who've looked at dysbiosis and other experts who've looked at the work of type B malnutrition, et cetera, et cetera. And all I've tried to do is to bring all this together and to form a kind of an overall map of the terrain.
Well, I
Um,
like that,
so,
but I know in chronic inflammation,
mm,
you before you actually met Zinzino, we'll have to go back to how you met Zinzino, but you were following along with Olaida, who was developing a test and something in regards to the omega balance. So how does all of that inflammation and omega balance tie together?
well, um, the concept of the 6-to-3 ratio and the omega-3 index, these have been developing for, I would say, it goes back almost 20 years. And one of the most important contributions to where we are now was where that was generated by two Norwegian scientists, Eilertsen and Eidevall. And these are the people who first started looking at the potential impact of the omega-3 long chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, and the polyphenols. They're the people who did all this. And then one has to give them credit. And the test itself was developed by people like Bruno Berra and some other Italian scientists and a couple of Norwegians up at the University of Trondheim. So a lot of people, many good scientists have contributed to this work. And I wasn't really responsible for innovating any of that. I'm the beneficiary of it. I'm the inheritor of it. I had been working along parallel lines because I had a chronic inflammatory condition myself, and this is 15 years ago now. And I was treating it because I'd read the work of Eilertson and Eidevall with a disgusting cocktail of fish oil and olive oil, which I was just mixing up and drinking. And of course, it was very effective. It did work for me. And this was one of the things that convinced me that we were on the right path. Um, we need the medical profession, of course, uses a lot of anti-inflammatories. They understand that many people have chronic inflammatory stress. They might not know why, but they use things like NSAIDs and steroids to treat chronic inflammatory conditions. Not particularly good to use long term because they're actually quite toxic. But that goes back to the question, why so many people have chronic inflammation to begin with. And really, you can break that down quite simply now. It's because of what the modern or industrial diet contains and what it doesn't contain. And it turns out that it has removed many of the important protective anti-inflammatory compounds. And by accident, we don't have to talk about some grand conspiracy, but by accident, it has replaced them with other compounds which are highly pro-inflammatory. So from that perspective, it's absolutely no surprise
So,
that
so
the
that's
modern
what you're
industrial
saying.
diet.
Because a lot of people would just say, well, if you don't have enough omega-3, you should just go out and take some omega-3. But what you're saying is we got something wrong in regards to what fish oil really is, that there's a difference.
Well, I wasn't saying that. And that is a leading question, but if you want to go down that road, we can
I
do that.
want to go down that road. I
Mhm.
want people to understand because that would be the obvious thing to say. If there is an omega-6/3 imbalance, you just need some omega-3. That to me,
Okay, okay,
that's just what people would automatically think. That's what I would think.
okay. Well, the reason why we have so much chronic inflammatory stress is partly because we have a very high, an abnormally high 6 to 3 ratio. It's not the only reason. There's other reasons as well. But to answer your question, if one of the factors is an excessive 6 to 3 ratio, and therefore an excessively low omega-3 index in our cell membranes, then we should just take fish oil. No, it doesn't work. And we have a database of many, many dozens, probably hundreds or by now, of clinical trials which used fish oil, standard fish oil, to treat inflammatory conditions involving the heart, the brain, the eyes, the joints, all of those different tissues. And basically, none of them work, or if they work at all, they have really almost a trivial effect. Now, this is rather counterintuitive because you think, well, not enough threes, let's put more threes in. Here's the problem. Threes don't work on their own. So the original work that was done in the Inuit in Greenland by two Danish scientists called Bang and Duerberg. This is a generation ago now. They said, well, the reason why the Inuit don't have cardiovascular disease is because they've got lots of omega-3s in their diet. It's more complicated. The Inuit have various genetic adaptations, which is important, but it also is the case that they're not just eating omega-3s. When you look at their diet, and it isn't just oily fish, they're actually eating more marine mammals. So for example, seals and whales, a much more important part of their diet. Those animals contain not only omega-3s, as in fish oil, but they also inevitably contain amphiphilic polyphenols, known as fluorotannins. Now, at this point, we have to step back from the Inuit, we have to step back from the whales and the seals that they're eating and ask ourselves the question, where do omega-3s come from? And omega-3s really have very little to do with fish oil. They don't come from fish. They come from marine algae. So that's at the bottom of the marine food chains, just as plants are at the bottom of the terrestrial food chains. And the marine algae in cold water produce omega-3, EPA, DHA, and a few other things. But they also produce the antioxidants, the chaperone compounds, which nature designed to do the job. These are amphiphilic polyphenols. Sorry about the jargon. But what that means is that they stick to the omega-3s, they stick tight to them and form little liposomes. So these polyphenols have got lipid-soluble heads, sorry, lipid-soluble tails, and they have water-soluble heads, which mean that they form little globules with the omega-3s, little liposomes, and they stabilize them. And they travel together into the gut and then the tissues of the krill, and then the gut and the tissues of the small fish and the bigger fish. And then the apex predator, which might be a killer whale, or it might be your mom eating salt herring. The omega-3s and the polyphenols always travel together. You never find the omega-3s on their own. They cannot survive because they're very fragile molecules. So if you look at the blood, at the tissues of people who eat oily fish, you find they have very low 6:3 ratios because the omega-3s, they're transported and kept safe by the polyphenols once they've been consumed, and they move together to the cell membranes. And people who eat a lot of oily fish have 6:3 ratios of below 5 and not very much chronic inflammation.
And why is it so important to have it that ratio? Why is it important? We hear the scientists say 3 to 1, but why is that important?
Well, because the sixes in your cell membranes are broken down under the right conditions to form compounds which are pro-inflammatory, whereas the threes are broken down to form compounds which are anti-inflammatory. And I don't want to get too fixated on the index because people like Bill Harris say, I think to probably pretty much correctly, that it's not as important as the 3 index, which is the total amount of omega-3s in your cell membranes. I
And
actually
and
think
how
that
much is
both are
it? What is,
important.
let's just ask that. What is the total amount that you should have in your cell membranes?
Probably 8% or above. And the reality is that because of our terrible, terrible modern diet, we see more people who have a 3 index of 3 or 2, which is not nearly enough, and a ratio of 6s to 3s, which is way above 5 to 1. It's up at 15 to 1, 25 to 1, 100 to 1. Now, someone like that is going to have chronic inflammation. And if you have chronic inflammation, it eventually it sets in train a process which culminates in the disorganization and then the disintegration of healthy tissue, whether it's in your bone or your cartilage or inside your brain or inside your arteries. It leads to destruction and eventually illness and death.
So the fish oil isn't going to make that balance for you, but when we do balance oil, when we found out about what balance oil did,
Mhm.
that worked more like fish has been working.
Well, because the balanced soil, the polyphenols have been put back in. They should never have been taken out. I understand why the fish oil industry did what they did. I think they hadn't really thought it through. They are now selling a product which is completely useless. And I would say more than worse than useless. It is now being increasingly suspected that standard fish oil may actually cause problems over the longer term. And one of those, which I think many in the audience may have come across, is the prospect of increased atrial fibrillation.
Mm,
Now,
mm,
this is where it gets really interesting. If you drink standard fish oil, it's not protected in the body. And so it breaks down into some really nasty compounds. And one of them is malondialdehyde, but that's not very specific. That comes from the omega-6 puffers as well. But also other compounds called hexanols and nonanols. And these are nasty compounds. They're pro-inflammatory. They're cytotoxic. They'll actually kill your cells in different parts of the body. And this is where it gets really, interesting. Some of them are arrhythmogenic. We know they cause cardiac arrhythmias.
mm.
So, although the data linking the consumption of standard fish oil to atrial fibrillations, I have to say it's a little bit weak, it's a bit messy. So many other factors are involved. I think there is a link. And I think that the companies that sell commercial fish oil, and they know already that their products are useless, I think they're now beginning to understand that their products may in fact be harmful. And they're continuing to sell their shoddy and poorly formulated fish oil products. I think is actually tantamount to public health malpractice. I think they should be shut down or forced to redesign their fish oil products and make them fit for purpose because at the moment they're not.
Mm. But that's what Zinzino has done with the balance oil. That's working the way it should and getting things into balance. That's why we take a test so you don't have to guess. So testing
Absolutely.
and getting that into balance is getting rid of that one of the factors. Let's go on on to the next one. Let's talk about this dysbiosis. Do you know, Dr. Paul, I've heard it again and again and again. So many people have gut issues, and gut issues seem to be affecting every part of your body, from your head to your toe to your hair to your joints to sleep issues. It's like everything is being affected by
Well,
the
your personality too, the relationship between the microbes in your gut and your mood, your irritability, your motivation, your impulse control. This is now quite well documented.
Wow. Okay. So we have the good and the bad bacteria in your gut, but all of these the factors that are getting us there, how do we get the gut healed? How do we
Hello,
get this?
hello.
How do we get this fixed this way? How can we fix this dysbiosis, Dr. Paul? Okay. We heard him say hello, hello. We're gonna have to get him back on here.
Okay, I
There we go.
apologize for that.
Okay. There we go.
I'm in a rather obscure part of the world. I can't say more than that, and
That's
the issue
okay.
is not good
Dr.
here.
Paul, we're just glad we got you on here, and it does hack a little bit, just lags once in a while, but your sound is coming through. We're glad you're still here. So, Dr. Paul, we're talking about the number two factor in regards to dysbiosis with
Right,
our
right.
good and bad bacteria in our gut, how important it is. And it seems like the entire world has dysbiosis, whether they know it or not. So, what can we do about it?
Again, a little history, I think, is relevant here. Um, if you look at pre-Christian Mesoamerican cultures, there's a group of people known as the Odham. Um, More recently, there you have the Papagenos. So these are the bean eaters, and these are cultures that consume very high levels of what we call prebiotic fiber. For example, in Nepalis, in beans, and maize, and when you do the math, it looks as if they were consuming approximately 140 grams of prebiotic fiber a day. That's a lot of prebiotic fiber. So that's about maybe a fifth of their total calorific requirements. And when you're eating a lot of prebiotic fiber, you grow a lot of probiotic bacteria in the large intestine. And they produce some very interesting compounds, which we call postbiotics, which have extremely positive effects on you. So, for example, these are very powerful anti-inflammatory compounds. They stop inflammation. And if you're producing enough of them, they stop chronic inflammation, not only in the gut, but in the liver, in the cardiovascular system, in the brain, and everywhere else besides. But these compounds have another property up their sleeve. They're very good at killing cancer cells. So when you're eating this much fiber, prebiotic fiber, you become, I won't say immune, but relatively immune to a very large number of chronic degenerative diseases. There is a downside. If you're going to eat that much fiber, you're going to fart a lot. You're going to be producing a lot of gas, uh, and you're also going to be producing butyric acid. And for all the chemists in the audience, butyric acid or butyrate doesn't smell great. So these people were healthy, but perhaps not the people you'd want to invite to a cocktail party. Now, let's go a couple of thousand years upstream. Now we're in the 19th century, and this is a period that I've studied along with other historians and published papers on. These are the mid-Victorians, in the period 1850 to 1900 in England. And in that population, which is much better documented, because that's an age of photography, of literature, and we know a great deal about this population, what they ate, how they worked, what they lived on, how long they lived, what they died from. They were consuming about 35 to 40 grams of prebiotic fiber a day. And that was clearly enough because they had no IBS. They had practically no IBD whatsoever and almost no intestinal cancers either. Extremely rare. They were recognized, but very, very rare. I've come forward to the year that we're in now, which as far as as far as I'm aware of, is 2024. Correct me if I'm wrong. And Our intake of these prebiotic fibers now is fallen from 140 to 40 to about 4, a mere 4 grams of prebiotic fiber a day, and in some cases less. So now your intestines are no, they really don't contain any of the probiotic species anymore. They've been starved. There's a few lingering on, but not much. And their place has been taken by proteolytic species, many of which are gram-negative. Now, because they're proteolytic, they destroy the mucosal layer and they come into direct contact with our cells, the colonocytes that line the large intestine. And because they're gram-negative, that causes intense focal chronic inflammatory stress, so much so that our cells separate and you develop what is known colloquially as leaky gut. And now all kinds of toxic substances and bacteria themselves are able to leave the gut. They leach into the bloodstream and they cause indiscriminate damage in many, many other tissues, including liver damage, and this is very well documented. Cardiovascular damage, your risk of heart attacks and strokes shoots up. Your risk of neurodegenerative disease shoots up. It's really a bad situation. And because some of these bacteria are escaping the sites where they're normally contained, they go and hide in other tissues, and that has now been identified as an important cause of autoimmune disease, which is exploding.
Mm.
So that's all happening outside the gut. Inside the gut, you no longer have this protection that the probiotic species should give you. Cancers are forming, they're no longer being killed. And this is why we're seeing so many more people with colorectal cancer and why we're seeing it emerge in so many young people. And those numbers have been exploding. Um, you see people in their 40s, 30s, even in their 20s presenting with advanced colorectal cancer. And this is so unnecessary. This is so avoidable. We have strayed so far from the paths of nutritional righteousness. We've been seduced by the food multinationals who supply us with these foods that are deliberately made to be addictive and which have extraordinarily little nutritional value. And it is this that is poisoning us collectively. And it is this that is destroying our public health in the way that we talked about earlier.
So how, so I know that we're going to move from that and getting into what's actually been working to fix it, which has been our prebiotic fiber. But why is this different? Why is the one that you formulated different from other fibers out there?
Well, it's a very simple formula, but it's actually probably one of the ones I'm proudest of because I think it's an elegant formula. Um, Different fiber lengths have different properties. So FOS, fructooligosaccharides, which some people believe in, are very short fibers, and the bacteria ferment them very quickly. So which means you can't actually eat very much FOS. If you eat too much FOS, you have all kinds of problems. You have bloating, and you have you'll develop diarrhea, abdominal pain, and distension. It's really not comfortable. And because they use up all the fiber very quickly, the bacteria, long before they've reached the top of the ascending colon, they've used all the FOS up, and now they're hungry. There's no more FOS. They start to switch on other metabolic sequences, and now they start producing compounds that are rather bad for you. So if you need to change, transform the microbiota from the beginning of the large intestine all the way through to the end, you need to have a very calculated mix of fibers of different lengths. Different lengths means different fermentation rates. So you have a little bit of the very short fibers, a little bit more of the medium fibers, more again of the medium to long fibers, and then you have the largest amount of the fibers which are really long and really complex. What this means is that the fermentation process, which switches the bad bugs over to the good bugs, starts very early in the ascending, the beginning part of the colon, and is then continued throughout the ascending colon and through the transverse descending sigmoid colons, and then right through to the colorectal flexure. And in this way, you change the whole microbiota and you protect the entirety of the large intestine. So this was designed, it was based on the back of the envelope calculation, although in my defense, I will say it was a very large envelope, looking at chain lengths, fermentation rates, the rate of transit through the large intestine, and almost more by luck than by anything else, we got it right the first time around. And this is something, it's very well tolerated. It's been extremely effective in helping people with IBS and IBD. And we've even heard stories, remarkable stories from people who had progressed, towards cancer. And I can't really talk about that because the law won't admit it, but perhaps you'll be able to contact people who've had these, remarkable experiences. Um, and perhaps equally importantly, it tastes good. So you can just eat it by the spoonful if you want. I mean, and some kids do as a treat. I designed it that way because if you're going to take something every day and it tastes horrible, you won't take it for very long. You'll find an excuse not to take it. You'll forget it, especially for children. And it was designed with all those things in mind. And as I said, it's very simple, and it's one that I'm very proud of.
So just fixing that dysbiosis and feeding the good bacteria with all these different prebiotic fibers is the key of that. Now, I'm going to ask a question I know many people have asked because so many people hear about probiotics and they're saying, but why can't you just take, if you need, the good bacteria is the probiotics, so why can't you just take more of those? What do you need this prebiotic for? So what's the answer to
Hmm.
that?
Well, the answer is colonization resistance. So if you go and eat an Activia yogurt or something like that, which is really a dessert, or if you were to take a capsule which says that it contains 10 billion colony forming units, these are tiny numbers, very very tiny numbers, and these are lab grown microbes, cosseted, fed and laid bred in ideal conditions, and you're sending them in to an environment teeming with hostile species which know the terrain and which are effectively wild species. So the metaphor that I often use is like sending in a squad of girl guides up to face the Chinese Liberation Army. They're hopelessly outnumbered, they're outgunned, they have no chance in hell of surviving for more than a day. And this is what we find. I was on the edge of a study that was carried out at one of the London hospitals where the experiment was we were giving people different types of probiotic species. And then what you could do, you could measure whether they were there or not in the stool after, the patients had taken the probiotic. And they were there in small numbers, but the day they stopped taking the yogurt or the kefir or the capsules, the probiotics were gone. They just don't take, they can't stick around because when they get into the large intestine, they encounter an environment that is densely colonized by
Mhm.
much, much rougher and tougher microbes. And they basically kill off the good guys. The good guys never have a chance to colonize. They never have a chance to settle. They cannot multiply because your diet isn't providing them with enough of the right fuel, which is the prebiotic fibers. Now, even on the worst of diets, there's a few of these good guys hanging around down there. And if you now start to eat prebiotic fibers, which are stable, completely stable, they get into the small intestine, they pass through, we can't digest them. They get to the large intestine, and the few good bacteria, your ones, the home turf players, they see these fibers coming and they say, thank you. They start to gobble up the fibers, they start to multiply, and these are the guys who know the environment, they know the terrain. And as they multiply, they have the weapons that they need to fight off the bad guys.
Mhm.
And that's the difference between prebiotics, which work, and probiotics, which actually don't.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're gonna get that fixed. So now we've got the chronic inflammation and we've got the dysbiosis. So let's move on to this malnutrition that you're talking about and the specific malnutrition. Could you explain what that is and how we can fix that? And we love when we're live, when we do this live every Saturday, and sometimes we just lose our main speaker. So last time he came back on, we're going to get him back here and talk about our malnutrition. Uh, so we do know that even though we're working at getting our full optimum health, that it's these four different drivers that are getting us out of optimal health. So we've got the first one, and he he just wrote me. He says, "Hang on." So we're all hanging on here to get Dr. Paul back. We never know where he's calling in from. He actually is working with many different countries, uh, doing different things for public health. I think that's one of the things we do also want to get into in regards to what he really wants to do in global health and making a dent in the universe of changing that. But in regards to these four drivers, so the first one, as he talked about, was the chronic inflammation. And how we can fix that is, first of all, take that test. You want to be 3 to 1 or better. Uh, we have a test that tells you exactly what you are. And I can see he's coming on. And then we also have this prebiotic fiber in Zinzino. We're calling it xenobiotic. So that is what's going to really give all of the making him co-host here again and helping get all of the different good probiotics in your gut, feeding them and strengthening them, maybe bulking up those little Girl Scouts in there to really fight that army. So now we're gonna get Paul back on here, and let's talk, Paul, in regards to the malnutrition and what you're saying is causing that and what we can do about it. Let's see. He must have connection issues because he's here. Just need him to unmute. There we go. We're going to try it again. One more time. We're making both of you co-hosts. So maybe one of them is on your computer and the other one is on your phone here, but we'll see if we can get you on, Paul. Don't you love it when you got
I'm
technology?
back. I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
wonderful. We got it again. We love technology. We love when we're doing lives, Dr. Paul, when we lose our guest speaker. But we're grateful you're back on. We are got to the point of the third driver, which is this malnutrition. Would you explain what you mean by that?
Right. Well, classical malnutrition would be things like kwashiorkor or beriberi or scurvy. We don't see much of that now. It's possible. I mean, if you eat a very bizarre diet and people who have food phobias of one sort or another, you can still, I mean, acquire scurvy if you work very hard at it. And when we see a patient with a condition like that, the doctors get all excited and they write letters to the Lancet or the BMJ. But this is not really much of a public health problem. This is not what we see. What we see are people who actually are depleted, not deficient. It means a slightly different meaning, not just in one micronutrient, but in many. So they're low in many of the vitamins, in many of the trace elements, and in a whole range of phytonutrients, uh, essential fatty acids, fiber types, methyl group donors, cyanogens, lots and lots of compounds. So why are they low in everything? And the answer is twofold. Firstly, we were designed to be rather more active than most of us are today. So a lot of metropolitan people are getting by on 2,000 kilocalories a day. We were not designed to be that inactive. We were probably designed to be running at about a minimum of maybe 2,500 calories a day, maybe three. So we're eating relatively little, and many of us are eating foods which have lots of empty calories. So, sugars and plant oils. So we're eating very little in historical terms. A lot of what we're eating has very little nutritional value. And this creates this pattern of type B malnutrition. And that has all kinds of problems which spin off from that. So if you have chronic inflammatory stress, for example, which most people do, that creates a problem where you're gradually losing healthy tissue. You can regenerate that if you have all the cofactors needed to reconstruct what is known as the extracellular network, extracellular matrix, has different names, the ECM. And in order to rebuild that ECM, you need lots of vitamins and trace elements and other things like that. So if you have a lot of chronic inflammation, which is breaking that matrix down too rapidly, and you also have type B malnutrition, you have an even more rapid breakdown of this matrix. So
So
there's an
just be
accelerated,
just to hear that one more time, because
yeah.
you're talking about how the vitamins and minerals and all of this is affecting our skin. Now, I've been doing this for over 10 years, Dr. Paul, and you've known me
I
for
I
that
didn't
amount
say
of time.
skin. I didn't say skin, Carla. It's another leading
What
question of yours.
Okay, well then I'm going to ask about it afterwards. You finish what
Okay.
you're going to say, and you're going to tell me about skin,
Okay.
because I think people want to know about the anti-aging effects of what this is doing too. But I heard extracellular matrix. I'm putting that together as skin. Why don't you go ahead and correct me on that?
Well, I'm not going to correct you because the extracellular matrix determines the thickness of your skin, its tensile strength, its viscoelasticity, and many other functions, including its hydration capacity and also its immune abilities too. But the ECM doesn't just run through the skin; it defines every other tissue in your body.
Mm.
So, if the ECM is being degraded at an accelerated rate, you will lose mineralized bone. You will lose cartilage. You will start chewing holes in the linings of your arteries. You will start losing brain cells. But you will also see a deterioration of the skin. And that's why some people say, well, if you have a skin that looks as if it's older than your true age, you're probably aging at an accelerated rate internally as well, because the same processes are involved. If you can maintain your extracellular matrix, that's good for all of the rest of your organs, but it does show in your skin. So I think that's probably what you were getting at. And the health protocol is designed to support the extracellular matrix. So it does have cosmetic aspects as well. That's not what it was designed for, but it's a kind of a desirable side effect.
I'm not complaining. I'm telling you, I think now at 56, I feel better and actually look better in my skin than I probably did in my 30s.
That's not uncommon. I hear that a lot. But this is not really a medical issue. This is human vanity, but we all experience that. I know it's important to many people. It wasn't really why I set off down this road, but as I said, it's not unexpected. It's an expected side effect, but for me, that was never the main target.
Hmm. Well, I like that if it's doing good things on the outside, that if it's affecting every uh, ECM in your body, and that's all on the inside too, man, that means we're looking just as good on the inside, which is more important anyway, Dr. Paul.
There is a
So
connection. It does connect. If you look good on the outside, it is generally saying to you, or saying to me, or anyone else who's versed in the art, that probably internally you're in better shape as well.
that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so with getting all the vitamins and minerals and this malnutrition, what we need in our bodies, you designed the Extend, which is all the vitamins and minerals that people are going to get, but can't they just like eat really healthy?
Yes, yes, you can, and that's a good thing to do. And I don't really want to medicalize everyone. I do think people should be eating a healthier diet than most people do now. Could you get everything you need from a healthy diet? Yes, you could if you were physically extremely active. So we crunched the numbers and looked at the nutritional content of all the healthiest types of foods, the most nutrient dense foods. And it turns out that even if you choose your foods very carefully and you're prepared to live on a diet of Brazil nuts and chicken liver and codfish roe, you're going to need to be eating about a minimum of 2,500 kilocalories a day.
Oh,
And for many people, that's just too much. I think to restore individual and indeed public health, we need to do one of two things. We need to abandon the cities and go back to living on the land and eating what we can grow and fish and hunt. And, that's a rather utopian prospect, which may be utopian for some, dystopian for others.
mhm.
Or you can prevail upon the food companies who are at the moment inflicting such harm on all of us and on our children. This is what I find so unforgivable, to redesign their ultra processed foods and turn them from the toxic products that they are now into health promoting products, which we can do now. If there was a will, we actually have the science evidence based to make that possible. I think it's difficult for the food companies to move in this direction too quickly. Because if they now say, well, we have these new and improved products which are healthy, the implication is that the old products weren't, and they clearly aren't. They're desperately unhealthy. So it's a little difficult for them to change that position quickly. They're like an oil tanker. It takes maybe 10 years for them to turn this around. So I would say in the meantime, there is the biohack that basically is the health protocol. It is the antidote to the modern diet and lifestyle. And what it does when you use this approach, it puts your inside, your metabolism or your metabolome into a time machine and sends it back 100 years in time to a time before ultra-processed foods became available and to a time when public health in many countries was far better than it is today.
Wow, that's incredible. So we just to hear the last thing, and I know I've taken up your time now. We've only got about 5 minutes left here, but could we talk about the glycemic mismatch? What is it? What does that really entail? And what are we doing for that?
Well, if you eat a diet, which most people do now, which contains too much starch and sugar, all of this will lead to large amounts of glucose entering the bloodstream. And people think, well, it's the liver that removes it to form glycogen. Well, to an extent, but actually the liver's capacity to do that is quite limited. Throughout recorded history and before recorded history, it's very clear that the main way in which we removed excess glucose from the bloodstream was by soaking it up into our skeletal muscles, where it was used to allow us to move. And what has happened is we're pouring more sugar into the bloodstream than ever. We're physically far less active than we were even a generation ago. So all the glucose is entering the bloodstream, it's piling up, it's not being removed quickly enough. And this is the main reason why we have such a global pandemic of metabolic syndrome and diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which between them now affect almost half the entire adult North American population. And it's going that way in many other countries too. How do you reverse that? Well, we've known that since the siege of Paris, when one of the fathers of diabetes was able to do, he found that in his patients who did have type 2 diabetes, that starvation was a really excellent cure to resolve their health problems. Most people don't want to starve now, but more recently, very well-regarded scientists such as Mike Lean and there's others have shown that if you cut down on sugars and simple carbs and take more physical exercise, you can actually reverse type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome and go back to normal. And that's important that you do that because once you move into these conditions, you lose a lot of health and life expectancy. That's very simple to put right. Now, not everybody can take exercise, and a lot of people simply won't. Is there a hack? Yes, there are hacks. Visit my blog, which I've
Well,
just put
just
into
say it
the
out
chat
loud. I know
box.
you're going to post it in here,
Okay.
drpaulclayton.eu. Make
Yeah,
sure
that's
you're following.
drpaulclayton.eu. So there are hacks. There are ways around this. There are products which are literally exercise in a capsule. They're not stimulants, but they just tell the body to respond as if you were taking exercise. One of them is a drug called metformin. Metformin used to be derived from a plant, Galego officinalis, or French lavender, and we know of many other natural compounds that do exactly the same thing. We would like to introduce one into Zinzino, but the regulators in Denmark are stopping us from doing so because I think a couple of them have been bought off by the pharmaceutical industry. Again, you can read all about this in my blog. Hopefully, we'll be able to get around this, and we will then have a final and fourth antidote to the last of the four major drivers of illness today.
We love that, Dr. Paul, that you're always working at making things better. So, Dr. Paul, the last thing I really want to do is a really short note. Because a lot of people have said, with all of these credentials, how did you end up working with Zinzino? And why? I know that at one point you were already working with Ola Ida in some things in regards to the test and the balance products. But when you met our founders, you met the CEO, what did you experience?
We sat down together and talked for a while, and I became quite impressed by their sincere desire to want to help people and to help to make the world a better place. I think it's that Scandinavian mindset, which some people find extremely irritating, but which I quite like in small doses. And I share that prejudice. I also think it's important that we try to leave the place just a little better than we found it, if we can. And I explained that they were selling coffee at that time. And I said, well, look, I think if we work together, we could become a life science company. I already had a vision of what the health protocol might be. And they said, okay, well, why don't we do that? And so they took me on, and 10 years downstream, this is where we are today.
So last and final question, where do you see this if we get the word out? We're working on hitting our 1 million, going on to 30 million, and in 2050, gonna have that 100 million in balance. What is that going to do for world health, in your opinion?
Oh, it'll absolutely transform it to such an extent. If we can reduce the incidence of chronic degenerative disease by 80 to 90%, and the science says we can, then we'll be able to close down hospitals and clinics, and we'll be able to shut down a large part of the pharmaceutical industry. We'll still need some pharmaceuticals, but it's a grotesque mistake to place them front and center of the healthcare system as we do today. That's a reflection of money and politics and corruption. We'll still need pharmaceuticals, but if we can improve the national and indeed the global diet, the numbers of people getting to the point where they require that type of medical intervention will be dramatically reduced. People will be healthier, they'll be happier, they'll be more effective, they will be living out their true biological potential, which so few of us are able to do today.
Dr. Paul, that just puts us in front and center on our mission and our vision of what we really want to do in Zinzino. I thank you for taking the time out of your schedule wherever you are in the world. And I know from all of us in Zinzino, we are so appreciative of you. I don't even think you know how much, but thank you, Dr. Paul. We so appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Today, I'm going to let you all unmute and also say thanks for today.
Thanks for today.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Thank you.
You're wonderful.
Fantastic.
Thank
Sir.
Thank you so much,
Awesome.
Dr. Paul.
Carla,
Thank you, bye.
Thank you so
Until the
much.
next time.
have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye. Great
Thank you.
job today, Carla.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Carla.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Carla.
Both later. Thanks.
Carla,
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Wonderful
you.
call. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Muchas
you.
gracias, saludos de Perú.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Bye, everyone.